The year was 1911, and the Missouri borderlands stretched wide and silent under an amber sky. Dust clung to the air, turning every sunset into a painting of rust and sorrow. Down a lonely dirt road came a wagon, old, creaking, and wrapped in mystery. Its driver, a tall man in a long brown coat and wide-brimmed hat, hummed softly to himself as the wheels groaned beneath him. His name was Ezekiel Morrow, though few ever spoke it aloud. To most, he was simply the traveling merchant of eyes. He carried jars, dozens of them, lined neatly on shelves inside his wagon. Each jar glowed faintly, filled with clear liquid and a single floating eye. When the sunlight hit them just right, they shimmered like souls caught in glass. Children hid behind fences when he passed. Dogs barked but never approached. And yet, those who had dared to meet his gaze swore he looked at them not with malice, but with an old, weary kindness. Ezekiel always said softly to anyone who asked what he sold, "I sell what people have lost, the ability to see." Every town had its own version of his tale. Some said Ezekiel was once a surgeon who went mad after his wife's death. Others claimed he was cursed by a dying witch to wander forever, collecting the eyes of sinners. But there was another rumor, told in hushed voices near campfires, that those who bought one of his jars saw things they were not meant to see. Truths too deep, too raw, too beautiful to bear. Old Mrs. Kilpatrick, who ran the general store in Curdsville, once told her grandson, "That man ain't sellin' eyes, child. He's sellin' what's behind 'em, the memories of souls long gone." Still, Ezekiel continued his quiet journey, stopping in small settlements, setting up his wagon in the town square, and whispering the same phrase every time: "One eye, one wish," for those who seek to see the truth. In a riverside town called Marion's Bend, the late summer sun dipped low, painting the river gold. By the bank sat Clara Hensley, a frail barefoot girl of about 12. She was blind from birth, her eyes pale and unfocused, yet her face was turned upward toward the sun, glowing with quiet joy. She hummed tunes no one had taught her and often said things that startled adults. "Mama," she once said softly, "the river sparkles like 1,000 fireflies." Her mother, Margaret Hensley, froze, for Clara had never seen a river. "Sweetheart," her mother whispered, brushing Clara's hair, "how do you know what sparkling looks like?" Clara smiled. "I don't know, Mama. I just feel it." That night, while the cicadas sang, Margaret prayed for a miracle. Little did she know, the man with the wagon was on his way to town. When Ezekiel rolled into Marion's Bend the next morning, the town buzzed like a stirred beehive. He parked near the old oak by the square, where traders once sold corn and tobacco. He lifted the wagon doors, and sunlight spilled onto the shelves. The jars gleamed like lanterns filled with spirits. Each eye was different: blue like morning sky, green like moss, brown like river soil. A crooked wooden sign leaned against the wagon: "Eyes for those who seek to see the truth." A farmer muttered, "Devil's work, that." A boy whispered, "Maybe he can fix Pa's blindness." And somewhere among them, Margaret Hensley stood watching with her heart pounding. When Ezekiel caught her gaze, he nodded gently, as if he already knew why she had come. Sheriff Turner, a big man with a thick mustache and little patience, stormed up to Ezekiel's wagon. He spat tobacco and growled, "We don't need your kind here, stranger." "We're God-fearing folk." Ezekiel tipped his hat. "Then you have nothing to fear, Sheriff." "I only sell what's already been freely given." "Given?" Turner sneered. "You mean stolen from graves?" Ezekiel's calm never wavered. "No, sir. These eyes are gifts, tokens from those who wanted others to see what they once could not." The sheriff narrowed his eyes. "You best be gone by sunrise. Folks don't take kindly to tricks." But Ezekiel only said, "Sometimes, Sheriff, it's not a trick. It's a lesson." As the sheriff stomped away, Ezekiel looked toward the river, where he saw a small blind girl sitting in the sun, humming softly. The moon rose pale and thin that night. Fog rolled off the river, curling through the streets like restless spirits. Ezekiel sat in his wagon, carefully sealing a new jar, when he heard a faint knock. Outside stood Margaret Hensley, shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders, fear and hope in her eyes. "Mr. Morrow," she whispered, "they say you can give sight to the blind." Ezekiel studied her face, then opened the door wider. "Not sight as you know it," he said gently, "but vision, yes." She hesitated. "I'd give anything for my daughter to see." Ezekiel nodded slowly. "Anything?" She swallowed hard. "Anything." He motioned her inside, where the jars glowed faintly, and whispered, "Then perhaps, Mrs. Hensley, it's time you learned what it means to see beyond the eyes." Ezekiel took down a jar containing a small, cloudy gray eye. It looked almost alive. He explained quietly, "These eyes were not taken. They were given. Each belonged to someone who wished another could see what they themselves had missed." Margaret trembled. "What must I pay?" "The price," he said, "is a memory of love. The purer the memory, the greater the vision it brings." Tears welled in her eyes. "My husband died years ago. The memory of him. It's all I have left." Ezekiel bowed his head. "Then it will be enough." She pressed her hand into his, and he whispered a word she didn't understand. A soft wind stirred. When she opened her eyes, she felt empty. The warmth of her husband's laughter was gone, like it had never existed. Ezekiel handed her the jar. "At sunrise, have Clara hold it to her heart. And remember, what she sees may not be what you expect." That night Margaret sat by her daughter's bedside, the jar glowing faintly on the table. Clara stirred in her sleep. "Mama, I dreamed of a man with gray eyes. He said the sun is brighter than gold." Margaret's throat tightened. "Go back to sleep, sweetheart." Before dawn, as the first streaks of light broke through the window, she gently placed the jar in Clara's hands. The moment sunlight touched the glass, a shimmer rippled through the air. Clara gasped, "Mama, I can see." But her mother's joy turned to confusion. Clara's eyes remained blind, yet she was smiling in awe. "I can see the colors inside you, Mama. You're full of blue, sad, but warm. And the river, it's singing in green." Margaret fell to her knees, tears flooding her cheeks. She didn't understand it, but deep down she felt something holy had happened. Word spread through Marion's Bend like wildfire. The blind girl could now see hearts. She described people's emotions as colors, kindness as gold, sorrow as gray, anger as red smoke. The town, once gray and tired, began to feel alive again. Neighbors who hadn't spoken in years began leaving food for one another. A lonely widow found the courage to forgive an old friend. When people asked Clara how she could see so much, she only smiled and said, "Because I'm not looking with my eyes anymore." Margaret watched her daughter blossom with awe, yet a part of her heart ached. She often caught herself staring at the empty chair where her husband used to sit, unable to recall his face. Something precious had been taken, but something greater had been given. Within weeks, more townsfolk came to Ezekiel's wagon. A widowed schoolteacher wanted to see her late student's joy again. A soldier begged to see peace instead of war in his dreams. A father asked to understand his rebellious son. Each one left with a jar, and each claimed to see differently afterward. The schoolteacher began hearing laughter when none was there. The soldier dreamed of his comrades smiling instead of bleeding, and the father, once stern, began hugging his son every night. The town changed. Even Sheriff Turner softened, often staring at the river in silence. But not all were convinced. From the small church on the hill, Reverend Wilkes watched with growing anger. "This is blasphemy," he muttered. "No man should wield the power to change how another sees the world." The merchant, meanwhile, sat quietly at dusk by the riverbank, watching Clara play, the sun's reflection glinting off the jars behind him. He whispered softly to himself, "Maybe this time I've done some good." The church bell rang furiously that Sunday. Inside, Reverend Samuel Wilkes thundered from the pulpit, voice echoing like thunder through the small wooden chapel. "The Lord gives us eyes to see His truth. This man, this merchant of false light, tempts you with the devil's illusions." The congregation sat silent, uneasy, for they had seen the good Ezekiel's jars had brought, and yet the preacher's words stirred fear. Reverend Wilkes slammed his hand on the Bible. "You trade your souls for sight. You barter holiness for trickery." Clara, sitting in the front row beside her mother, rose quietly. Her small voice trembled as she said, "Reverend, if kindness is the devil's work, then I'd rather be blind again." The room fell silent. Margaret held her breath as Clara turned toward the pews, though her eyes were pale and unseeing. "I can see colors around everyone," Clara whispered. "Some of you are gold, warm and bright, but some are black as coal, not because of sin, but because of fear." A murmur spread through the crowd. The preacher's face turned red with rage. "Enough!" he roared. "This blasphemy ends tonight." The moon hung full and red that night. Ezekiel sat outside his wagon by the river, whittling a small wooden charm when he smelled smoke. Then, a sudden crash. Flames burst through the wagon doors, the fire spreading like a hungry beast. He tried to save the jars, those precious vessels of memory and hope. But townsmen were already there, torches in hand, led by Reverend Wilkes himself. "This ends here, merchant," the preacher shouted. "No more witchcraft in God's land." Ezekiel's voice cracked. "You fool! These eyes belong to the kind-hearted. They gave their sight so others might see." But the crowd didn't listen. As the wagon burned, the jars exploded one by one, sending streaks of blue and gold light spiraling into the night sky, like souls set free. Clara awoke miles away, gasping, her chest aching as if a part of her had been torn away. "Mama," she whispered, "the eyes are crying." By dawn, the wagon was nothing but ashes. The preacher was gone, shame gnawing his heart. The townsfolk avoided speaking of it, afraid of what they'd done. Only Clara dared return to the site. Guided by a pull she couldn't explain, she knelt in the soot and ran her fingers through the warm earth until they brushed something cool, a jar, unbroken. Inside floated a single empty eye socket, hollow and peaceful. A note, scorched but legible, was tied to the lid. "For the one who already sees clearly, you owe me nothing." Clara clutched it to her heart, tears falling onto the glass. "Mama," she whispered, "he left this for me." He knew this would happen. Margaret hugged her close, heart heavy with guilt. She wondered if Ezekiel had sacrificed his own sight, or his life, for her daughter's gift. No one ever saw Ezekiel Morrow again. Some said he perished in the fire. Others claimed he walked into the fog and simply vanished, like the spirits he helped set free. But strange tales began to spread across the borderlands. In towns miles apart, people found small glass jars left on their doorsteps, glowing faintly under moonlight. One widow said she held hers to her heart and dreamed of her late husband smiling again. A lonely farmer said his jar showed him the face of his newborn son, long buried. And every time someone asked who left them, the answer was the same: a tall man with gray eyes and a wagon that shimmered like starlight. Years passed. Marion's Bend grew quieter. The river slowed, the people aged, and Clara Hensley became a woman. Her gift had deepened. She no longer just saw colors, she saw memories. When she touched a hand, she glimpsed the pain behind it. A father's regret, a mother's grief, a preacher's shame. She often sat by the river, holding Ezekiel's final jar, whispering to it when the nights grew long. I wish I could see only beauty again. One evening, she felt warmth through the glass, and saw, for a fleeting moment, a vision. Ezekiel walking through a field of golden wheat beside a woman and child, smiling peacefully. She smiled through tears. So, you found them. Your family. In the spring of 1932, when Clara was in her 30s, the Marion post office received a weathered envelope. The paper was brittle, the ink nearly faded. The address read, "To Clara Hensley, the girl who sees." The letter inside was dated October 1911, months after the fire. If you're reading this, then I am gone. I was never a doctor, nor a thief. I was a collector of promises. Every eye I carried was a gift of love, a final wish from those who could no longer see. They asked only that someone worthy carry their sight forward. You, Clara, are that someone. You saw the world with your heart before I ever gave you eyes. Never doubt that what you see is truth. It was signed simply. Clara pressed the letter to her chest, whispering, "Thank you for giving me what I didn't know I already had." That night, Clara's mother sat quietly by the fireplace, staring into the flames. "Do you remember your father, Clara?" she asked softly. Clara hesitated. "Only through your stories, Mama." Margaret smiled faintly. Then her eyes filled with tears. "I don't remember him anymore," she whispered. "Not his face. Not his voice." Clara's heart broke. She had always known her mother had traded something that night. But now she understood the true cost. She placed her hand over her mother's. "You gave me his love so I could see love in everyone else." Margaret nodded weakly. "And I would give it again." They wept together, the jar glowing softly beside them, a silent witness to a mother's sacrifice and a daughter's gratitude. When Margaret passed a few years later, Clara buried her by the river, the same place where the miracle began. Beside the grave, she placed Ezekiel's empty jar, now filled with river water and a single candle flame. She began crafting more jars like it, small glass vessels filled with water and light. She called them eyes of kindness. To the broken-hearted she gave one and said, "Hold it close. It won't let you see faces, but it will help you see truth." Some said the jars glowed brighter when held by those with pure hearts. Others said they felt nothing except peace. Soon, people began calling Clara the woman who gave light without eyes. Decades passed. By 1961, Clara was an old woman with silver hair and skin soft as parchment. She lived alone in a cabin by the river, surrounded by jars, hundreds of them, each one softly glowing in the moonlight like stars trapped in glass. One night she felt her breath weakening. The air shimmered faintly. The last jar on her bedside table flickered. She whispered, "Ezekiel, I can still see you." The flame within the jar brightened, and for the briefest moment, she saw him, standing beside her bed, older now, smiling the same gentle smile. "You've done well, Clara," he said softly. "You gave sight to those whose hearts were blind. You carried the light forward." Tears rolled down her cheeks. "Did you ever find peace?" He nodded slowly. "I found it. In you." And with that, he faded like morning mist. When Clara Hensley passed away, the entire town gathered by the river. Her home was filled with jars, glowing even after her death. The townsfolk buried her beside her mother, her grave marked by a single glass jar filled with sunlight. Etched into the stone was an inscription: "She saw the world as it was meant to be seen." On certain misty mornings, travelers passing through Marion's Bend swear they still see a wagon in the fog, the faint sound of glass clinking, and a voice whispering, "One eye, one wish," for those who seek to see the truth. And somewhere, deep in the Missouri borderlands, the legend of the traveling merchant lives on, a tale of love, sacrifice, and the kind of vision that has nothing to do with eyes, but everything to do with the soul.